Calling to order the Cuyahoga County Council Operations, Intergovernmental Relations, and Public Transportation Committee for Tuesday, May 2nd, Cuyahoga County Administrative Headquarters, CL and Connolly Council Chambers, 4th floor. It's 3:02. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
And just as a reminder to all who are in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, Mr. Sweeney.
Present.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent. Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Shrine.
Here.
There is a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilwoman Turner is in attendance.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk, and to my colleagues, thank you for your attendance for this one piece of important legislation. Is there any public comment, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Lou.
Lou, come on up. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I'm glad that we will have another very important and great legislation for the county, wage theft. However, the scope, unfortunately, as a county legislation, we can only extend so much. But in the whole county, in reality, we need this kind of legislation actually go more than just this current scope. Right now, of course, we maybe have to figure out something else in the future to see how to extend that to help all the people in the county. Because I believe the company which commits this kind of behaviors, this kind of, I will use the word crimes, they would know better not to have a business with county. Because with this legislation, they definitely will get caught. And that's bad for them. I think they will be smart enough not to do that. So talk about the reality is, majority of the people in the county, they will not be able to have a job always within the county government or in any organization having a contract with the county. So how would they be able to survive when their hard-earned earning wage has been stolen? The hours they spend on working, I see that in the shelter all the time. As I said before, we have this particular gal. She works in those so-called call centers. She's good. She knows she should be at work on time. If she cannot go to work, she will try to let them know in advance. She's willing to switch shift with other people working there. So she does her part. Even shelter rules are always against people working. But guess what? By the time she's supposed to get paid, the outsourced payroll company has some hiccups, so they cannot process the payroll in time, so you guys have to wait. Or when she gets a paycheck, it's only partial payment. Whatever listed in the contract doesn't really reflect in her paycheck. How about these people? Where is the justice for these people? It doesn't matter if you currently are poor or you are okay financially. But when you go out to work, you spend the time, you spend your energy, you put in effort. You do not get fairly compensated. Then that may cause you start getting short on your rent, on your utility bills, on all these essential stuff. Then eventually you probably can get into the trouble with eviction, utilities cut off, and all other things. Think about inflation. The inflation doesn't care your wage is stolen by your boss or not. So lots of time, people like this particular gal, they have to quit a job within like 1 or 2 months. How many cycles they cannot get paid? Then they have to find another job. So the life is a vicious cycle for them. Please consider having an opportunity to extend all these good legislation to really help all the people in need of help. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. As always, your advocacy is very genuine and helpful and kind of tees up the legislation that we're about to hear. Approval of the minutes for the April 4th, 2023 meetings. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
Do I have thank you. It's been motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None. The minutes are approved. Moving to the matters referred to committee. Madam Clerk, would you please read the legislation?
Ordinance number 2023-0009, amending section 505.03 of the county code to provide that wage theft committed by current or prospective contractors shall be grounds for debarment.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. This Legislation 0009 was sponsored by Dale Miller, our council colleague, as well as co-sponsored by, I think, 6 or 7 others. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Dale, and then we're going to have 4 presentations regarding different aspects of this legislation, and then we'll have discussion throughout the entire committee from questions from the council members. Councilman Miller?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My colleagues, I'm pleased to present proposed ordinance 2023-0009 on wage theft. I would like to thank the Guardians for Fair Work and Nora Kelly in particular for your help in bringing this legislation forward. Thanks also to my colleagues, councilpersons Sweeney, Kelly, Tuma, Stevens, Turner, and Simon for your support in sponsoring the legislation. Thanks also to Mike King, Paul Herdig, Inspector General Alexa Beeler, and Michelle Rose from Ohio Means Jobs for your help and support in putting this legislation together. Wage theft occurs when employees do not receive properly earned compensation for the work they have performed. For example, Milo was hired by a construction company to hang and finish drywall for residential construction projects. He and 4 co-workers started work on a townhome project. They submitted photos of their work completed and hours worked through an app the company asked them to download. There were several incomplete or missing paychecks that the employer blamed on the app and changing pay periods. When the project was complete, the employer stopped answering their calls and changed the locks so that they no longer had access to the property, including some of their personally owned tools. The employer had no intention of paying these workers the thousands of dollars they were legally owed for work performed or returning their tools. Drew works at a restaurant as a waiter. He is not allowed to clock in for the day until he completes about an hour of pre-shift prep each day cleaning the restaurant. Even though this is illegal, the employer insisted that this was just how he ran his business and that people who don't like it can quit. Annie is a housekeeper at a large downtown hotel. She is an independent contractor and is paid by the room. Most weeks, her pay is lower than if she were properly classified as an employee and paid minimum wage. Annie was illegally misclassified. Wage theft is more common than generally recognized. It takes many forms, such as sloppy record keeping, requirements to perform unpaid work, improper calculation of lunch and break time, improper calculation of sick leave or vacation time, failure to pay overtime, misclassification of employment status, and more. Thousands of employees have a hard time surviving on the wages they are paid even when properly accounted, let alone when shorted on properly earned compensation. All employees have the right to be confident that their work will be fully and properly compensated according to law. Proposed Ordinance 2023-0009, patterned after legislation from Cleveland and Columbus, will help deter wage theft by providing that Cuyahoga County will not contract with businesses determined to have engaged in wage theft. Cleveland and Columbus set up fair wage review boards to implement their policies. However, rather than create new structures, this legislation proposes to use our existing debarment process. Determinations would be made by the Inspector General subject to appeal to the Debarment Review Board. The county will not conduct its own investigations as to whether wage theft has occurred. Rather, we will use the existing state and federal processes. Debarments under this section will normally be for a period of 3 years. The legislation also adds an element to the contracting process, requiring contractors to certify that they have not had an adverse determination on wage theft over the preceding 7 years, which is the same time period that's included in several other certifications in that same section. The legislation also includes an education component. The Inspector General will help educate employers through the contractor ethics training process, and Ohio Means Jobs will help educate workers as to their rights. The Department of Development is designated as the contact with OMG, but since OMG already provides similar services for Cleveland and is enthusiastic about doing this for us as well, this will not be a difficult task for development. It will strengthen Cuyahoga County's economy to be known as a community where workers can rely on receiving the wages that they properly earn. In furtherance of that end, I ask for your support of Ordinance 2023-0009. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Miller. We talked about briefly the amended version in regards to reporting. Can we talk about that?
We do have a substitute, yes.
To my colleagues, I'd rather maybe introduce a substitute so we can have the opportunity to discuss the legislation that we're going to move forward with.
Okay, so
I'll do that later. I'm just trying to get
no,
processed.
I think that makes sense. So I will move the substitute at this time and ask if Mike King could come forward and explain to us the changes.
Thank you, Councilman Miller. Thank you, Chairman Sweeney. Yes, this is a very simple proposed substitute. It does two things. One is it makes a technical correction to the short title of the ordinance to reflect all of the code sections that are being amended here. And the second, as you in your opening statement, Councilman Miller referenced, that the education component of this ordinance will be administered by Ohio Means Jobs, but since Ohio Means Jobs is a separate sort of joint city-county board, the council doesn't have direct legislative jurisdiction to impose powers and duties on that board. We needed a point agency within the county to coordinate, and we initially drafted it to be the Inspector General. In conversation with the Inspector General, since it was introduced, we deemed that that was probably not an appropriate job for the agency of Inspector General, and so this proposed substitute would shift that responsibility to the Department of Development, who coordinates with Ohio Means Jobs on workforce development programs, generally speaking. But that is the entirety of the substance of the proposed substitute.
So my colleagues, as you can see, the changes are minor. I move the substitute and ask if one of my colleagues would second it.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, Mr. King. As always, your work is impeccable. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for your comments. And what we have here now is four entities that are going to present and have a dialogue if we choose to engage, which I believe is going to just...
Mr. Chairman, because of the way in which this was presented, it was almost as though we had a dialogue from the sponsor presenting this. So would it be appropriate to ask the sponsor some questions in regards to his narrative that he laid out, or would you rather we wait?
No, I don't mind going each individual one. So I apologize for not allowing questions to Mike King or to Councilman Miller, the sponsor. So the floor is yours to question either or have dialogue with either the entities that presented.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions that come up to my mind on this, Councilman Miller. When the county had a failure to pay our lunchtime appropriations, and it went on for years and years and years and years and years out there, would that have been subject to the same wage theft?
So,
Because we clearly didn't pay it. We clearly fought it. We clearly gave every reason in the world not to do it, and we said that that the time, almost the exact same example that you did with the time punching in out there.
Mr. Chairman, to my colleague, Councilman Schwan, you are absolutely correct that the case that the plaintiffs filed was essentially an allegation of wage theft. So it's definitely analogous. The Cuyahoga County felt that the hours were in fact determined properly, and so they fought the litigation.
Well, and I'm not trying to say on the other three examples that you raised that they might not have that same issue raised that the county raised, and we fought that for years, and it was something that we had a lot of pressure from our employees saying that we had committed wage theft. They didn't use those words, that this county, more than any example you've raised, was far in excess of the amount of money we're talking about here. So we have to be careful as to when we start using terms like that we are as guilty as anybody that you are talking about doing in regards to this.
So, Mr. Chairman, to Councilman Schwan, I want to make it very clear that that nobody is going to be debarred for wage theft based on suspicion. You know, it requires that that it go through the state or federal determination processes, and that a final determination be made. If the state or federal determination is appealed, well then there could not be a debarment until the appeals are completed, because the way the legislation reads, it requires a final determination before the contractor would be subject to debarment.
And let me be very clear. I have no sympathy whatsoever for any employer who doesn't fairly pay. I've been in business for a number of years, and our business has been in business for 80 years, and we would never think twice about anything that would cross over a fuzzy line. That's just not who we are. But I'm looking at what we already have in place for disbarment, and everything you've talked about. Item 7, under the current disbarment, we define theft as rules for grounds for disbarment. We define tax evasion, which means if you fail to report your taxes or any way or shape or form, whether it be federal, state, or local, that's grounds for disbarment. We define a criminal violation of any federal, state, or local tax laws, all of which failure to pay an individual would be a violation of those three items. And it just seems to me that what we're doing, you can get caught up in the momentum of whatever's the current vogue, and we already have rules and regulations. And I bet if we ask even our attorney or our any of our other members, our inspector general, I'll bet if they looked at this, they're going to see that we already have coverage for exactly what's being proposed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much, Council. Because we have the Inspector General here, and she has a fellow. I just wanted them to come up here, introduce her, because I don't know if they're here for a month. So if you come up, introduce your fellow, and then go sit back down, I'd appreciate that. Because it's kind of cool. It's a program from the American Council of Young Political Leaders, and she's spending a month with our IG. So I'm taking a moment to go out of protocol, but I think it's important for everybody to know.
Good afternoon, Chairman
Madam.
Sweeney and Council. This is Lee Ping, our fellow for the month from Cambodia.
Just introduce yourself, please.
Good afternoon, all the councilmen. My name is Lip Yang from Cambodia, and Maybe just give you a little bit background on me because I'm here for a month or 4 weeks in this building. Yeah, so I've been working in Cambodia mainly in NGO sector, non-governmental organization, and the focus is on the gender equality, anti-corruption, and human rights. So I come here to learn more how the agency detect, investigate, and eliminate corruption in Cuyahoga County. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity for having me here as well.
Good job. Thank you, Madam Inspector General. That was a commercial break, but it was important for me to do, and I appreciate everybody's patience with me. So which presenter would like to come up first? And what we're going to do right now is hear from 4 different entities to talk about what they believe this wage theft legislation will accomplish, and I believe why it's important to them and should be important to us. Please state your name and tell us what you want to tell us. Is a green light on by the microphone? Now it is.
Testing. Okay.
Say your name again if you don't mind further.
My name's Andre Daly, and I'm from Council District 10. I came down to speak today about the legislation being proposed because it's very near and dear to my heart, wage theft with workers. So I've been separated from the Navy for about a year before I got my first job. And in that time, I had my wages stolen by a very big employer. They didn't need that money, but it was still in their best interest, I guess, to withhold some funds from some people. I'm sure there are already laws and protections on the books for workers, but what we've done up to this point has not been enough, and we need more help, workers in this region. Guardians for Fair Work is a coalition of over 30 grassroots, community, and labor organizations committed to advancing pro-worker policies throughout Northeast Ohio. We support the wage theft and payroll fraud legislation and are grateful for Councilmember Miller's collaboration on the measure. Just a reminder, wage theft occurs anytime an employer does not pay appropriately. Sometimes that's as blatant as not paying minimum wage. Sometimes it's paying an employee their regular rate, even for overtime work. It can also be classifying an employee as an independent contractor, cheating them out of benefits and not paying taxes, or failing to provide a final paycheck. We urge swift action because damage inflicted on these workers and their families is hard to overstate when considering the impact of wage theft. It is important to recognize that wage theft has an outsized impact on low-wage workers in Cuyahoga County. The ranks of low-wage workers are disproportionately people of color. This is a critically important issue to address in creating a more equitable and inclusive county for workers and their families. We urge urgent action on this wage theft legislation. It's time for Cuyahoga County to join the growing movement of cities, counties, and state governments across the country taking on wage theft. I'd like to see Cuyahoga County join the rest of the country in empowering workers. We can't have a strong middle class if we don't have strong workers. We can't have strong working families if we don't have strong workers. So I've come today to ask you guys to please help out on this. Thank you.
Stay right there. If you come up there, you're going to expose yourself to questions. If
All
you
right,
want.
I'm ready.
I'm glad you put those prepared statements away.
Yes.
You got that in, and when you started talking, you saw the passion. I'm just curious, when they took your money, what options did you have to get it back, if at all, and what did you try to do to try to retrieve it?
That's a very good question, one I was not prepared for. When my money was stolen, so basically it was a situation where one of the ones I described, you're working, they ask you to clock out, and your work continues for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours. I talked to the company, the manager, I talked to my union rep, everybody almost associated with this organization that I could, and I said, hey, we're clocking out, they're not letting us leave, under threat of being fired. And, you know, they did nothing. They weren't able to do anything.
Mostly ignored, or
Yes.
mostly placated, or?
Placated, ignored. It was a group of about 10 or 15 people working the night shift at a very popular local restaurant. So it was placated, ignored. They act like there was something that they couldn't be bothered to deal with. So I understand that we have a legislation on the books already, but as far as what these employers are actually able, without county government as a partner, to do, it seems to be diminished.
and I just want to be very specific what this legislation does. Any contractor that does business with the county, and I believe this to be accurate, would be subject to disbarment, meaning they can't do any more work with the county, which is part of their model.
Yes,
So it's not private entities just yet.
correct.
Just strictly, this piece of legislation is dealing, because that probably wouldn't have affected your situation.
No, not at all. It wouldn't. But I think a very clear message needs to be sent to employers in the region that would steal wages from workers.
So that's the benefit from your world.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
On that same line, Mr. Chairman, how would this have you read this legislation?
Yes, I have.
And how would this have affected what you just described as far as the impact on you?
So I'd have to know if the county has ever hired my former employer. It's a very popular place. I'd have to know if they'd ever have hired that person, because if they had, then with this legislation, they wouldn't have been able to hire that person. Is that correct? Yeah, so.
But how would it have affected the money going to you, this legislation?
You already said it didn't affect him.
Yeah, no.
Oh, okay, so you would not have gotten anything as a result of this legislation, is what you're telling us?
Could I say the name of the employer?
It's up to you, but you don't have to.
Chipotle. Do you guys ever use Chipotle for contracting anything up here? Has that ever? Never.
I couldn't tell you. Someplace, I'm sure, within the county.
But
Somebody
we're
might-
not sure, but if we were sure, then this would ensure that the county did not hire or work with entities that were stealing wages from their workers.
What I got out of him, Mr. Chairman, is bringing awareness, if this passes and there's a buzz about it, and the other non-entities that don't participate with the county, they might go, wow, this is getting serious. We got to stop our actions. Will it happen? Don't know, but I think I heard that from you when you were.
And I think that's a worthwhile goal and reason enough for me to support this legislation, so.
Okay, so it only impacts people who are doing business with the county.
Yes, that's correct.
And currently, if what you're telling us, and by the way, you realize, even though you weren't sworn under oath, you are subject to criminal penalty if anything you said was false.
It wasn't, so
I'm
I'm
not
fully
asking-
prepared
I'm
to take that
just reminding
risk.
you that that's the way this works.
Yes.
So that employer did not pay you, would that be theft in your mind?
Yes,
Would that have been tax evasion, that they didn't properly pay you and that therefore it was not, they didn't properly hit taxes which they should have been paying for workers' comp, unemployment comp, things of that nature?
yes, that's
Yep,
correct.
Yep. Would that have been a criminal offense in your thoughts? And I'm not trying to be-
Absolutely, absolutely
So
criminal.
all those three things you just described are things that are currently already allowed to disbar Chipotle from doing business with this county if they did those things that you're talking about. They're already in place. I just read from what are currently in the law right now. Nothing new has to be done to do that.
Are we sure about that?
I'm sure because that's a law. Yeah.
Absolutely, we're sure about that. And
Okay.
he's just making a point right now.
I see.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have no.
Yeah.
I have some comments.
Oh, is it all right?
Up. Sir?
Come on back up.
We'll come
Councilman.
back up or not, but I just wanted to thank you
Thank you.
for deciding to still advocate in a space for something that obviously won't benefit you, but maybe some others.
Yes, correct.
So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Number 2, welcome.
Thanks. Before I sort of dig in, for the record, my name is Nora Kelly. I'm a Cleveland resident and live in District 2, and I'm here on behalf of the Northeast Ohio Workers Center. But before I get in my proposed remarks, I just want to commend my colleague and friend, Andre, for giving statements about his experience with wage theft, because it takes real courage to do that. I just want to be really clear about that. And he's part of a campaign that is fighting for workers besides ourselves, right? And so our job, I think, is to look out for everyone in this county. And I just want to be really clear about that. And I am really grateful to be doing this work with him because, again, it takes real bravery to especially go up against big employers who have a lot of power, right? And in our review, in our legal analysis, and I am a lawyer, that there is not adequate coverage in the existing debarment statute, right, for the county to be very clear that instances of wage theft under the Fair Labor Standards Act, right, or under the Ohio Revised Code to ensure that instances of wage theft are covered. And we view this legislation as critically important to protecting workers in our region, but quite honestly, also protecting businesses that don't undercut, that aren't undercut by workers that don't follow the law. So I just want to be really explicit about that on the front end, right? But again, I'm here on behalf of the Northeast Ohio Worker Center, and I encourage a broad-based dialogue. I think Councilman Miller and Councilman Sweeney can tell you that I am happy to have a debate about any of these issues, and I do think it's critically important to dig in on the specifics of this because we view refining and having an end product that meets the needs of folks in the county is really critical. But I do just really want to underscore that it does take real courage to come up and to do these kind of things for working people, right? So again, members of the committee, very grateful for the opportunity to be in front of you today to speak on this really important issue. As I mentioned, I'm with the Northeast Ohio Worker Center. The Worker Center is part of a larger movement around the country to bring together working people to educate people on our rights in the workplace, organize our workplaces, and then receive legal and support services from allied and supporting organizations. At the Northeast Ohio Worker Center, these efforts are in service to our mission of transforming our economy to better serve our community and to also do grassroots advocacy. So that's why we are here today, advocating, in our review, a very important public policy. As my colleague Pam Mason explained last Tuesday during public comment to the full council, we at the Northeast Ohio Worker Center view ourselves as partners in tackling wage theft. We understand that the legislation itself, which we all read very carefully and went over as a steering committee, does not solve in its entirety wage theft, but it is a very critical step forward in taking on this issue. When you look at the magnitude, we will hear the actual empirical data from Policy Matters Ohio in terms of the number of workers impacted in Ohio. This is an important step forward in making sure that we're doing business as a county with responsible employers. But it's also a really important values proposition, right? Saying that we are going to do business with employers that are aligned with our values as a county, right? We at the Worker Center see ourselves as partners because we host a monthly wage theft clinic. So if there are instances where people, workers believe that they've been a victim of wage theft, we are a supporting resource to help people navigate that process. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of that role. But I really want to spend the balance of my time talking about the national landscape and the growing understanding of the impact of wage theft on communities all across this country and here in Ohio. A 2020 report from the State University of New Jersey's School of Management and Labor Relations entitled Wage Theft in the United States, a Critical Review, provides some really important context for our discussion. It found that as a result of growing awareness of wage theft in the United States, that there have been efforts to curb wage theft at the national, state, and local level. Worker centers and labor partners, community-based organizations, along with legal services agencies have built successful campaigns around this. And what evidence is this is between 2005 and 2018 alone, 24 states, 57 localities, enacted 141 laws to regulate wage theft practices, right? So I think there's a growing awareness across the country. Last year alone, there were 4 notable wage theft ordinances passed across the country that I wanted to spend a little time highlighting. First, in December, the Austin City Council passed landmark legislation on wage theft to protect workers. Additionally, the Denver City Council took aim at wage theft by unanimously passing an ordinance. And then the San Diego Board of Supervisors crafted wage theft legislation that was specific to several most impacted industries: janitorial, landscaping, and security. And then finally, we're very proud that the Cleveland City Council in December of last year attacked wage theft by passing an ordinance that bars, similarly, the city from doing business with contractors that have engaged in, or have been found to have engaged in wage theft. It's important to note, and this growing sort of landscape of local policies and state policies, that those scope of policies differ by geography. We do think that that's an important thing to point out. There are more robust policies in some states, including the ability of states to investigate. Councilman Miller really importantly pointed out that we are leveraging the investigatory powers of both the Ohio Department of Commerce, if there was, for example, a failure to pay state minimum wage, or the U.S. Department of Labor through the Fair Labor Standards Act. So we do want to make sure that that's clear. We view the county's work on wage theft as a natural extension of the work that Cleveland City Council started last year, and an important step forward in addressing wage theft, and quite honestly, raising the understanding of the general public about critical issues facing working families. Finally, we believe it's important to remember that the impact of wage theft is widespread, from significant impact on workers and their families, and I just really want to underscore the median income for a Cleveland family is just over $30,000 a year. And Mike will touch a little bit later on the average wage theft is about $2,800 a year for impacted workers. That's roughly 10% of the income for Cleveland workers that are struggling. So I just want to understand the scale of this and the impact on working families. But it's also lost revenue, quite frankly, for city, state, and local governments when employers pay workers fairly. And then again, I just really want to underscore this. It undercuts employers that are following the law, quite frankly, right? You are essentially giving employers that engage in wage theft a leg up by cheating workers. And so again, it's an important step forward in making sure that we're not doing business with those employers that are leading the race to the bottom from a labor standards perspective. We are confident that this legislative body values the dignity of work. We look forward to partnering with you moving forward on building a county that works for all of us. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Very passionate.
And I would love to answer any questions.
I'm going to start with one. We have the AFL-CIO here.
Yep.
We have other union partners.
Correct.
I know you can't speak for them, but the building trades, was there interactions, communication, involvement with their perspective on this piece of legislation? If so, can you enlighten me?
So broad-based support of this nationally. Wage theft legislation is a priority for the labor movement generally, and I don't want to steal Brian's thunder as the North Shore representative, but I will say that for both labor unions across the board, but nationally, wage theft legislation is a priority for the building trades, and thankfully locally here too, we have support, as I understand, from you and Councilman Miller from the building trades locally as well.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Thank you very much, and I look forward to the next presentation.
So, I thought I did raise my hand. Sorry about that.
Oh,
sorry about that. Well, I didn't raise it high enough. Sorry.
Oh,
Apologize,
my bad.
Mr. Chairman.
So
Dave Wananowski is in favor of this?
That's my understanding.
Do we have that on record?
I can concur.
Okay.
I was just throwing her a softball.
Oh, you concur that he has supported?
We went over to his office
Okay.
and sat with him with the legislation that he produced from Columbus, which pretty much mirrors the efforts by the Coalition of the Guard.
That's correct, yep. And again, wage theft legislation is a priority nationally for organized labor, whether it's the building trades or other elements of the labor movement.
Okay, and you indicated you're an attorney, and I'm an attorney, so
Yep.
neither one of us, well, good for you too. So neither one of us.
I don't know that good for me. I don't know that I'm the biggest fan of our profession.
Oh, that's okay. We won't have to defend.
I enjoy all the lawyering jokes, I guess.
Fortunately, we don't have to defend that. The only question I really ask is neither one of us can speak on behalf of what you said, that whether or not our disbarment already covers this, other than our giving our own personal opinion. The only opinions that matter would be from our IG, from our legal counsel, from our internal counsel. And I don't know that we've heard those, and I'd like to hear those on the record before we would take a vote on this. I mean, obviously, our IG would be one that could certainly speak on this. And I noticed I didn't want to ask her because she was here for a different purpose. But our internal counsel legal advice, and then the county's legal advice as far as whether or not our disbarment already covers the elements of what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, give me deference for the other two, get them.
Sure,
give them the opportunity to ponder or process.
I'm not sure how
and then we'll come
fast
up.
we're going to move.
I also think, though, that you do want to look at the definition of adverse determination. I think it provides with specificity what that means, and I think that that's helpful because part of what we want to do, this is not meant to be punitive legislation, right? The goal is to make sure that the expectation is clear, right? And you mentioned
disbarment is punitive.
Well, it's not punitive in this way. Let me explain this
Through
from this
the chair,
perspective.
so I can control this a little bit.
to the chair, just to be really clear, the goal is to be explicit about expectations, right? And as you mentioned, being an employer, if you're following the law, you don't have anything to worry about. And so the goal here is to be really explicit around the question of adverse determinations. And if it's very clearly defined in the code, then we're providing, and we build into the contracting process, we calibrate the expectations very clearly on the front end for employers. The goal, again, is to make sure that we're being transparent with contractors that are doing business with the city. So it's really to change behavior. It's not meant to be punitive, right? But there is a ability to debar people if they are not following through, because they have an obligation to identify whether there had been an adverse determination, correct?
And you're aware that we did this to our county employees, hundreds of county employees, where we argued almost the exact same issues, and it took years and years and years of holding back wages on behalf of them.
Just to be really clear, I think that if that is in fact what happened, I would find that deeply
All you do is
problematic.
go back and read the records, you can find it. It's a public information, so it's not something I'm bringing out all of a sudden at this moment.
I mean, I appreciate that, but I guess what I'd say is, as someone who does organizing on behalf of workers, I would find that to be problematic no matter what setting it's in.
Do you know if the city of Cleveland has a disbarment in their contracting, similar to what we have in Cuyahoga County?
What do you mean in terms of this wage theft legislation?
No, before that.
Right.
Did they have a disbarment prior to the passage of this similar legislation?
This is actually, it's different the way that the municipal code is structured, as you know, in Cleveland. So what ended up happening with the wage theft legislation that was passed in Cleveland, it added the oversight of the wage theft policy to the Fair Employment Wage Board that was established in 2000 with the passage of the Fair Employment Wage. So the structure of it is a little bit different. It's somewhat analogous, but there is a process for not doing business and clawing back incentives. It doesn't look identical to what's in the counties. You know, typically jurisdictions have similar but not entirely identical codes.
Okay, so our disbarment that we already have in place, you are not comparing that to what, if anything, they might have had in the city of Cleveland.
I guess what I'm trying to explain is what Councilman Miller explained. There was an effort in both Cleveland and here in Cuyahoga County to not have entirely, to create new bodies for oversight purposes, right? So I think what is especially smart about this legislation is it builds on existing infrastructure, right?
I'm not talking about the infrastructure. I'm not talking about how it is supported from a support or failure support after the fact.
I guess I'm not sure what the question is. Can you reframe the question?
Yeah, we are looking at a piece of legislation.
Correct.
Additive. You said that they passed a similar piece of legislation in the city of Cleveland.
Yes, similar, but when I say similar, I mean the policy. So let me explain that really quickly. If you let me finish.
I'm worried about how it's
well, let me finish my. Yep.
Just for protocol, so I can stop there.
Yep.
Just go through the chair, so it'll slow it down for half a second.
I appreciate that, Chair. So through the chair, I appreciate that. When I said similar, I meant the policy that was actually enacted. So, right? So what it does is very similar. It essentially says the city of Cleveland will not do business with contractors where there's an adverse determination of wage theft, or provide financial incentives to employers that have engaged in wage theft where there's a final determination, correct? And so I would argue as a policy proposition that is very analogous, right? Now, the mechanics of where it is embedded in the code or how that interplays with the existing debarment infrastructure is slightly different. But I think it is fair to say that the policy is very similar. Through the chair.
Okay, through the chair, my point is that we have had a disbarment in place since the beginning of this council.
In 2012, yep. I read the passage of the original ordinance.
What's that?
Yep. Through the chair, I read the original ordinance.
Right, and so it's been in place. I'm asking whether the city of Cleveland had one similar in place, not recently passed, which you're talking, you keep trying to bring those two analogy, this one and the one that just passed city of Cleveland. I'm trying to ask, did they have a disbarment like ours that's been in place from the very beginning of county government?
In one place like that, I don't know the answer to that.
Tell you we do, and you just heard a confirmation from the individual that the items that we have as far as theft, tax evasion, and criminal were what he acknowledged out there. So
through the chair, it is also true, though, that violations of the Fair Labor Standard Act are not necessarily criminal, right? And so you could have a violation of an employer failing to pay the minimum wage. Are you suggesting that if someone failed to pay the minimum wage, then they would currently automatically be debarred under if there was a finding of a failure to pay minimum wage?
Through the chair, Our punishment is not criminal. Our punishment is disbarment, which is economic.
Okay. So just to be clear, I just want to make sure I
Under both
understand.
of these standards.
Just to make sure I understand the point through the chair, that it is your view, Councilman Schron, that if there was a finding by any employer that is a contractor with the city for failure to pay minimum wage, for example, that they would get a 3-year debarment under the existing code?
That will be the determination of the
We're gonna
IG.
find that out later.
Yes, well, that'll be a determination when we ask for legal opinion. So let me
So if there was a failure to adequately, just through the chair, if there was a
Point of
failure to
order.
adequately classify a worker or improper classification with an adverse determination, would that also be subject to debarment?
Slow down here.
Yep.
We have these, excuse me.
Yep.
Councilman Miller's going to make a comment.
Yep.
I just want to recognize him, basically.
I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, and my colleagues, I think it would be a mistake to make too much of the possibility that that perhaps a debarment for wage theft could be executed under the current code language. The Inspector General gives a report every 6 months, which I've attended regularly, and I've taken an interest in debarment, and I always ask the Inspector General what new debarments took place these past 6 months and what were they for, and I don't know of there being any debarments having occurred for wage theft, and it may well be that if the Inspector General took an aggressive position and wanted to pursue this particular issue, that perhaps it could be done under the existing language, but if we pass this legislation, well, then it puts everybody on notice that we're serious about this, and that we're explicit that this is cause for debarment, and I think that's worth doing, whether or not the Inspector General technically has the ability to bring this kind of action under the current language. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments, Councilman Miller, and I'm going to turn the floor back to Councilman Schron, and then the debate will continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through the chair, to Mr. Miller's comments. We clearly have brought on the record a national organization today that their brand and their name and their modus operandi and their business within Northeastern Ohio, because it sounds like it was a reoccurring, continuous process by that organization, has been challenged. And I think that there would be an obligation by the IG to actually bring this forward at this point in time. We're not talking about a small item here. There was an allegation that hours and hours of time were stolen from these individuals. Theft, tax evasion would have taken place because withholding and unemployment taxes would not have been paid on behalf, and a criminal violation. So, Mr. Miller, based on your raising that issue, I wholeheartedly would encourage the IG, even though they maybe have not used this provision up to this point, they have an obligation at this point. This is on the record. This is a public information. And you, as our law advisor and director on this, I think this is because I think that if you probably check our records for the last 12 years, someplace you will find somebody has used Chipotle in this organization and written it off and used it, I'd be willing to bet, as an expense item. So with that, the burden has now shifted, I believe, in this particular case, Mr. Chairman. And I also would point out from an example standpoint, which has been raised a couple times about the city of Cleveland. The city of Cleveland only last week put forth the first time ever in the history of the city of Cleveland the creation of an IG. We've had that from day one. I would not use that as a standard out there. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much. Your passion is very evident, and if you want to comment on Councilman Miller's stuff.
Yeah, just grateful for, I think it is absolutely the view of the Worker Center. I think the proposition that Councilman Miller just underscored So I appreciate it. Thank you.
And it reflects what the gentleman before said in regards to momentum. Come on up, Mr. AFL-CIO. And thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you, County Council. My name is Brian Pearson. I am the Legislative and Political Director at the North Shore AFL-CIO. We represent 85,000 working people in Cuyahoga, Lake, and Geauga counties. Those workers belong to 150 affiliate unions. They do everything from janitorial work to working at grocery stores. Even the Cleveland Browns are an affiliate of the North Shore. At the AFL-CIO, we believe in the wild idea that if you put in the time, you put in the work, you should be paid for it. And and that's whether you're in a union or not. We understand that when employers take advantage of workers, it hurts all of us. Now, fortunately, and we know through the research from the Policy Matters that belonging to a union automatically cuts your risk of being a victim of wage theft in half. For everybody else and for the union folks, we need certain guardrails, and we rely on government, on you all to ensure that we have a fair system for folks. And so we fully support this legislation. We think it not only safeguards workers, and particularly, construction and food service and hotel workers, a lot of low-wage folks. It safeguards them. It lifts those workers, and we also are hopeful that, and I personally believe, that it will keep people honest, and we'll have more what we call high road employers doing business with the county. So short and sweet, happy to take your questions, but like I said, we are in full support of this legislation, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. So you're kind of a fair day's wage for a fair day of work kind of thing?
Yes, yeah, exactly, yes.
Okay. Councilman?
Mr. Chairman, I can't think of any employer who would not support exactly what you said. That doesn't matter whether they're union shop, non-union shop. I cannot believe that anybody who gets up in the morning, looks in the mirror, says that I intend to cheat somebody today. If there's a small micro percentage, that could be a union shop, it could be a non-union shop. It doesn't make any. If somebody's going to cheat, they're going to cheat. I'm sorry, but the average, I think, employer does not wake up in the morning and saying, boy, I hope I can cheat some of my employees out of a few bucks out there. So I would agree with you, agree with the chairman. If you work a fair day, you should get a fair wage, and that should be the end of the conversation. I agree 100% with you. We can shake hands, have a beer together over that point all day long.
See, that's why I'm the easy one to have up here. But through the chair to the councilman, I agree. But I think what Mike Shields is going to tell you is that hundreds of thousands of workers are somehow become a victim of this, and so
You're stealing his thunder.
well, yeah, and I already stole a stat that it cuts it in half. That blind to a union cuts it in half, but he'll go really into depth on that because it is a problem, and we're whether they're union or not, the AFL-CIO wants to make sure they get their fair pay. So
thank you for your advocacy and your presentation.
Thank you very
Very
much.
important. And last but not least, batting fourth, cleanup hitter. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Michael Shields. I'm a researcher over at Policy Matters, Ohio.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me. Everyone who works deserves to be paid the wage that they agreed to for all of the hours that they worked. Unfortunately, far too often here in Ohio and across the U.S., that doesn't happen. I released a report last spring in which I found that 213,000 Ohioans are victims of wage theft through minimum wage non-payment alone every single year. Minimum wage non-payment is not the only kind of wage theft. You've heard some others from other speakers here today. But wage theft also includes not paying time and a half for overtime, misclassifying workers either as salaried and therefore overtime exempt when really they meet the definition of a worker who would be qualified for time and a half overtime. or misclassifying them as independent contractors, not workers, not employees at all. So then they don't have any of the protections that attach to someone's status as an employee. And it can even extend to simply not giving a worker a paycheck at all. We see this a lot in construction projects, or in some cases, not giving the last paycheck that a person would be owed when they leave their job. So this is a pervasive problem. The Economic Policy Institute has found that nationally it costs about $15 billion every year. That is more than the cost of all property crimes, robberies, burglaries, motor vehicle thefts. All of those amount to a little less than $13 billion in a year. So this is a very large-scale problem. Anyone can be a victim of wage theft. There's a good chance that folks on council and folks listening have experienced that at some point in their own careers. But there are people who are particularly likely to be victims. These are folks who are vulnerable in other ways. My research has found that native Spanish speakers are 74% more likely to be victims of wage theft. We know that 3 in 5 wage theft victims, I'm talking about minimum wage non-payment, frankly, because we have data, we can research that and have much more detailed information about it than we can for other types of wage theft. And we also know that black and white workers are about equally likely to experience wage theft, but black workers work more hours on average for the employer who has stolen from them, and they lose more pay. That's an indication that they may face fewer alternatives to be able to leave an exploitive employer and find another one. And we know, that comports with data that the unemployment rate faced by black working people runs about double the rate for their white counterparts. That is in good economic times and bad. The AFL's chief economist, Bill Spriggs, has characterized that as a dynamic of structural racism that is built into our labor market. So we know that workers who are vulnerable in other ways are also more likely to be victims of wage theft. Unfortunately, most people who do experience wage theft will never tell us. They don't come forward for a number of reasons. They may not know their rights. They may fear retaliation from their employers, which does in some cases materialize. It's against the law, but it happens. And they may simply fear that nothing will be done on their behalf, which again is often borne out in reality. The state of Ohio has only 5 investigators and a supervisor dedicated to overseeing wage and hour law for all of the state of Ohio. That's more than 5.5 million workers. The U.S. Department of Labor most recently told me that they also had 23. So we've got a handful of folks looking at this question for a very large workforce. And the bottom line, what it comes down to, is that many employers, certainly not all, Nora Kelly talked about the employers who are also harmed by when their competitors commit wage theft. But many employers look at this landscape and rightly calculate that stealing pay from their workers is a good business strategy, that it's worth the risk. That should never be the case. Unfortunately, that pans out too often in Ohio, that most victims won't come forward. Most employers who do steal from their workers will never be held accountable. And this is a large-scale loss. You know, we talked about, a lot of folks have been quoting the statistic that I found. The typical wage theft victim in Ohio, based on non-payment of the minimum wage, loses about a quarter of their take-home pay. If they keep that job for the full year, that's a loss of $2,900. In another context, if it was the worker stealing that amount of money from their employer, that's a felony charge that could carry a prison sentence.
That'd be felony, yeah.
That is not how we treat wage theft in Ohio. And unfortunately, that means that too often employers make a calculated decision that there's a good chance they can get away with it, but even if they can't, it was worth the risk. They may be told they have to pay back the wages. They may be told they have to pay back some portion of the wages. In any case, too often, it's worth the risk. That's what we have the opportunity to change here. That's what municipal governments have been doing across Ohio and in the United States, looking at this situation and saying, okay, well, how can we help? What can we do? And what we can do is say, listen, if you are found to have committed wage theft against your employees, you can't get a contract. You cannot do business with the city of Columbus, with the city of Cleveland, with Cuyahoga County. That's the opportunity that you all have to pass here today. Wage theft is a serious problem that causes significant harm for working people and for the wider economy. It should be costly. Any employer who is who might, simply because it's the right thing, might not pay all of the wages that are owed to their staff simply because it's the right thing to do, should face the calculated decision that that's a bad idea. It isn't worth the risk. And that's what we can do here. I think that's all I got. I didn't prepare a statement. I was asked to make one sort of ad hoc, but I'm very happy to answer any questions that you all may have for me, and I thank you for your time.
And thank you for your presentation, and everybody, thank you. I'm just curious, I'm an employee. How do I even know I'm getting cheated?
That's a good question.
Because some people have different levels of paying attention to their paychecks. You can talk about that briefly for me?
Sure. So there are a number of ways that people may experience wage theft, and sometimes people don't realize. I had an employer at one time who was deducting a lunch break from my shift, but never told me that I was allowed to take a lunch break. I had never taken a lunch break. It wasn't until I started looking at my pay stubs. So, well, wait a minute, these hours aren't adding up, right? So sometimes people don't realize. This is a thing that happens oftentimes with misclassification. Oftentimes, if a worker is misclassified, they may be receiving the pay that they thought they were supposed to get, and they don't realize until they receive a 1099, and then they get the tax bill for themselves that has never been withheld, and also for the employer portion. And, that's a way that people can sometimes be surprised. Like, this has gone on for many months, and now, there's an additional bill from the IRS that the person is faced with. It's, I think, become a little more challenging in the landscape that we live in right now. For the last several decades, employers have increasingly contracted out portions of their business, and as a result of that, oftentimes people may not even know who their employer is. Oh, okay. They know where they show up to work, but they receive a pay statement.
And they know they get a paycheck, and they don't always check the pay stub, and they just keep going along, and they've been cheated the whole time, and they don't realize it until it's either discovered by them or brought to their attention.
Absolutely. This whole line of dialogue here, I think, underscores the reality that leaving it to individual working people to figure this all out and assert their rights vis-a-vis their employers is not going to work, and it's abundantly clear that already it is not working.
And just on the perspective of our first presenter and Councilman Miller, the heightened awareness just by the discussion that we're having today might get hopefully will get some employees thinking about it. Is my paycheck all right? And they look at it and they can say it's all good, or, wow, I did find something because of the discussions we're having.
Absolutely. I think to Councilman Miller's point, it is worth passing this legislation simply to affirm and make it clear that this is not something that Cuyahoga County will stand for.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I would just get to the lawyers if you want. Or do you have questions? I'm trying to move it on. That was a slick move. I got called, checked in the board there. Councilman Miller.
So, Mr. Chairman, my question is whether you have any information as to whether wage theft is more or less prevalent in Ohio and greater Cleveland as opposed to other states in the country, and also whether you have any information on whether it's more or less prevalent in the United States as opposed to other countries.
Unfortunately, I do not know the answer to that. I mean, I can tell you there are constraints on our ability to research this. We know that most people are never going to report it when they've been a victim of wage theft. My research on this looks only at minimum wage non-payment, and we can look at that question because we can identify who is eligible to be paid the state or federal minimum wage, and then from that, I use census data, who hasn't been paid that much, all of the wages that they were owed. So there's a whole, there are a whole host of other individuals who experience wage theft, and we simply cannot see it. We cannot see the, overtime non-payment. We can't see the misclassification. Unfortunately, our research here, we know this is a very large-scale problem, but we also know that we have not been able to fully account for its scope.
Okay, so thank you for the answers, and your data shows that just looking at minimum wage alone, that it's a very large problem, and we know that there's lots of other different kinds of wage theft as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Michael, I apologize. I didn't catch your last name. I only caught
Shields.
Shields. Thank you, Mr. Shields. One of my big problems with this whole thing is the word theft. Theft to me implies an intent to steal as opposed to an accidental activity. Can we maybe agree that an accidental activity is not the same thing we're talking about as somebody who chose to actually take money out of somebody else's pocket?
Unfortunately, I don't think we can agree that non-payment of wages. Well, let me say it this way. Yes, non-payment of wages definitely constitutes theft, right? Unfortunately, very often, even if a person does make a report, an investigation is done, they may go through an entire legal process, and the employer is found responsible for their wages. Then they struggle to even collect the wages in the first place. So we're not talking about, an innocent oversight. Investigating agencies, we have the U.S. Department of Labor looks at this. Here in Ohio, we have the Department of Commerce. They work with employers. They take very often the perspective that they try to educate employers first. But we very often see employers that, they may have they may be incorporated under one entity, and then they have a wage theft investigation. They close shop, and they incorporate a new company, and they do the same thing. We see people actively trying to evade responsibility for this. We see people who have had determinations against them who do nothing to make it right. So, no, I think we're maybe not quite on the same page about that.
Okay, so you can't have an accidental failure to pay, is what you're saying?
You can have an accidental failure to pay, and then if you find out about that and you don't make it right.
No.
that is theft.
Let's just stop right there. Can you have an accidental failure to pay? Through the chair.
Is it possible? Yes. Does
Okay.
it constitute?
Does
what
that
we're talking about?
constitute theft at that point in time, wage theft?
If you're informed and make it right, of course not. But if you don't, then yes. And if you do it on
Different
purpose.
story, but I'm stopping right there. If you have an accident. In your particular case, you said you were not paid for a lunchtime set aside.
Sure.
You all of a sudden you looked at your wages and you got your stub and you saw that you were not being paid for your lunchtime.
Yes.
In your offer to be employed, do you think it was that covered, that there was going to be a lunchtime break?
I was never told that I could take a break.
Okay, so the employer stands up here and says, under oath the same way you are, I told him that you would get a lunch break. We obviously have a disagreement about whether you're going to get paid or not paid to take a lunch break. So you work through your lunch every single day is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. There's not a day in which you spent your entire work career with this individual that you did not take a lunch break. You worked all the way through and never got paid for it. So that's what you're telling us. You should have actually got paid overtime for that, more than likely, too.
Probably.
Yeah, you should have got paid time and a half. If you worked 8 hours plus your lunch, you should have got time and a half for that half-hour lunch or whatever I think you said you got deducted. Let me this is more of a curiosity or kind of a fun question. If the tables were on the other side, do you know of anybody who does not work their full 8 hours and gets paid 8 hours? Is that theft on the employee side? Is that wage theft from the employer? From the county? If we, all you have to do is turn on any TV station, you can see police, fire, all kinds of individuals sometimes that are not working and yet they're being paid.
Well, I think this is a really good question. People
That wage
often,
theft? Just for curiosity.
Oh, let him answer. He's
So-
answering it this way. Because it was a
so-
fun question, so.
If people are on the clock at their place of employment, then they're doing their job, right? Even if they're simply on standby waiting to be called to execute whatever duty, right? This is a real, I think that this is a challenge that we start to see, in fact, growing in our labor market, where we'll have people who are scheduled on a somewhat like an on-call basis, right? Where employers have tried to sort of shift the cost of having people who are available to do work at any time onto employees themselves, right? So that could be, we call you and you have to come in immediately, or it could be you report to work and you might get sent home. Those are challenges. You know, it's not, in most cases in here, in Cleveland, it's not illegal to schedule somebody in that way. You know, oftentimes people are able to get better scheduling through something like a union contract. And I think that it is a real concern about the, you know, precarity of work and the irregular nature of work, how it disrupts people's lives, and it can make it really difficult to earn a consistent living, and it can make it disruptive to do things like, you know, taking a side job or going to school so that you can get more education, get a better job, what have you. So those are challenges. You know, I mean, some of the things that you're talking about are not illegal. They're just like problems that we have to figure out how to fix. But I do think it's a little bit of field of what we're talking about here.
Well, no, it was more of a curiosity, more of a fun question, as the chair found enjoyment in the question itself. I think also it was, you went down a different path. The path I'm talking about is clearly when you have the I-Team or one of those TV stations and
They're shopping
they find
at the
somebody
store,
is clearly violating, they're not doing their job. I mean, we've all seen it on TV. If you've never seen it, I'll send you the clips.
I look
Is
forward
that
to it.
wage theft when that person is doing something clearly outside the scope of their enjoyment, their employment? They are being paid, and yet they are doing a frolic, fishing, doing something where they're being paid. Is that wage theft on the flip side?
I would say that if you are at your job.
No, they're not at the job. They're futzing around, but they're getting paid.
Okay.
He's not going to answer it.
Is that wage theft?
Look, I have said, I will say that if you're at your job on standby waiting to be given an assignment, then you're doing your job.
And we're just dancing around.
Yeah, he's not going to answer the question. That's clear. So you said that the average loss is up to 25%. You said 1/4 of their pay. This
Yes.
happens. I thought I heard you say that.
Yeah, so it's close to $2,900, and because these are folks who would otherwise be paid the minimum wage based on the number of the hours that they work. The findings that I found was that costs about 24% of what would be the take-home pay for the average affected victim.
So the average person is making $12,000 based on that number.
I think
Their
it's a little
annual
less than that.
salary would be $2,900, 25%. My quick math says that that's $12,000.
Yeah, a little less than that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if anybody's making $12,000. That's their annual salary, but we'll stay with your numbers. Thank you, Mr. Shields. I have no other questions other than I'd like to get the folks from the lawyer side of our in-house, because I think we're already covered with the legislation. Have you read our current legislation?
Not the amended one. I read it before.
Have you read the current one that's in place, that's been in place for the last 12 years?
In regard to debarments.
Oh, no, I've read the ordinance.
You've read the new stuff.
You're correct.
But you haven't read whether or not you're actually covered doing everything you're talking about in our current disbarment that's been in place for 12 years.
And you brought it up, and I imagine he's going to read it.
I'd be willing to bet he will. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And to the presenters, thank you very much. We're going to hear from the entities that are here, if they're prepared to talk, and then we will continue on with this legislation. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, you want to come up? Is that Mike first and then law departments? All right. Jack, that's right. Mike first, that's right. I'm actually going to try to move this in some capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Michael King, council staff. I'm just going to repeat the question just to make sure I understand it correctly, which is whether or not our current debarment law covers instances of wage theft, right? Whether wage theft under our current debarment law is a debarrable offense. Is that accurate?
Are the terms theft is in debarment, tax evasion is in our debarment, criminal violation of federal, state, and local taxes elements that we would have to establish under this new piece of legislation that's already in place, and that would cause debarment. Yes.
With the standard disclaimer that I am not the formal legal counsel for county council, I will defer to the law department's ultimate decision on this. My personal view is that based on our current debarment law, I think there is, it does appear broad enough to cover most, if not all, instances of wage theft and payroll fraud. I believe the theft and the tax evasion, theft could cover wage theft. Tax evasion could potentially cover payroll fraud as it is defined in the ordinance. This ordinance would, however, explicitly add wage theft to that list of enumerated offenses and the specific statutory violations that would potentially be subject for debarment.
Very succinct. Escape while you can. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I would like a little more time to converse with the law director, just to make sure we're on the same page. Otherwise, I would have to concur with Mike in just looking at the strength of the language of Section 505.03A. There's many different things enumerated. As far as a 3-year debarment under Section 505.03B, that leaves it up to the Inspector General based upon a reasonable belief. Part 3, violation of prevailing wage laws, is something that this could fall under. And when you're talking about a reasonable belief, you're also opening up another can of worms of what a reasonable belief is and what kind of investigation would suffice. Because I think, as you've kind of pointed out today, Mr. Tron, there's two sides to both stories, the employer side and the employee side, and is a mere allegation enough? I would say no.
Thank you. Through our law, passing this legislation, would it hurt the debarment or hurt the cause at all? Just chill for a second. If we pass this legislation, will there be anything detrimental to our?
I don't personally think it would hurt the cause.
That's good enough. Thank you.
Anytime.
Come on up for one more. I don't want to get in a heavy debate, but. No, it's debate. I didn't say anything other than that.
As much as I love debating, I just wanted to point out that.
Who are you?
Nora Kelly again.
Say it every time.
I'm back for round 2. Just to be really clear, I think that is the benefit. The adverse determination is that it's a final determination, right? I think that's the benefit of the language as it has. So it's not a question of whether an employer feels like it's an unfair allegation of wage theft or whether a worker is lodged a complaint. The final determination means that it's an adjudicated finding, right? And so I think that way it makes very explicit those determinations of wage theft. So it leaves, I think that adverse determination definition is really critical.
Perfect.
Because then it's not a question of he said, she said, essentially, right?
Thank you for the clarification from your opinion. Jack?
How much more definitive could you have than a conviction or a civil judgment? I'm sorry, but this is what's actually in our current
No,
legislation.
absolutely. No, we're good. We have yours and we have yours.
Yeah, that's about as definitive as you get.
Okay. Hi, Nora.
I agree. I'm sorry, that was in response to the law director saying that it was unclear. Like, again, you said determination of potentially of prevailing wage and other items. The adverse determination as it relates to wage theft makes it really explicit.
Yeah, all she was responding to was with the comments from our assistant law director. And I believe that's what occurred. So the floor is yours still?
Yeah, and all I was doing is going actually to the language that we have in place that's been in place for 12 years. And it says that the conviction of a civil judgment within the period. So you can't get much more definitive than a court actually slapping the gavel saying there's been a conviction or there's a civil. So that takes all doubt out at that point in time.
Well,
And the only other folks that we've had advice on this at this point in time is the IG, and obviously she's an attorney also.
do you want to come up? Thank you, Madam Inspector General.
Alexa Beeler, Inspector General.
Welcome.
Hello.
And please present.
So I do think that if we were to receive an instance or a case where there was a civil judgment, a conviction, even if it was an arbitration award, which is one of the things detailed in the definition of adverse determination, we would have enough to act on it under the current debarment code. I would also like to point out, though, that under, 50503, which details all of the 5-year debarments, all of the offenses that would give rise to a 5-year debarment, ends with a catch-all. Commission of any other offense indicating a lack of business integrity or business honesty that seriously and directly affects the present responsibility of a contractor. Similarly, with the 3-year debarments, it also lists many offenses that would give rise to a 3-year debarment, and also ends with a catch-all, actually 2, violation of any other responsible business practice or any other cause determined by the Inspector General to be sufficiently serious and compelling so as to represent lack of good faith or responsibility by the contractor. So just to be clear, I'm neutral on whether this passes, but while I do think there's probably enough here for us to move forward with the debarment, for any of the reasons, the additional reasons listed today, there would probably be, because of those catch-alls, reasons to move forward with any debarment for any of the other enumerated offenses in A and B. So it just, I think, depends on what council wants to specifically enumerate. So for instance, we have forgery, bribery, falsification. They're specifically enumerated, but we could also go under the catch-all. So while we could, I'm just, my point is I don't know that it would hurt to add, but again, I'm neutral. I had one concern, which I appreciate Councilman Miller addressing, and so that's just, I wanted to point that out.
Thank you. So passing this legislation, in your opinion, would have no adverse effect and could actually have a slight benefit in regards to awareness if it passes this county council. Would that be accurate?
I don't see any reason why that's inaccurate.
You are a wonderful lawyer, without disrespect to that fine profession. Jack?
Yeah, I just, as a lawyer myself, simplicity sometimes brings actual resolution, and we already have things that are in place, none of which have hampered you. You almost heard one of our colleagues comment that, I'm not sure what the purpose of his comment was, that we have not disbarred anybody. So that means we haven't disbarred anybody for forgery, for bribery, for falsification, for records, for any of these other things. And to include, we haven't disbarred anybody from, but I thought we have disbarred people, have we?
I think he was specifically mentioning wage theft.
Oh, just wage theft? Oh,
I
okay.
thought.
Do we know that any of those disbarments might have involved falsification of records? Or, I mean, theoretically, any time a business falsifies financial information, they're falsifying tax records. That then translates to potentially wages, anything else that gets rippled on through because of a business doesn't exist based on one single line of the income statement. It's a whole bunch of things that all get added up together to make that out there. And so it seems to me that we've had all the tools. Have these tools ever slowed you down from disbarring anybody?
No.
If you would have had a wage theft, as is being discussed, would have stopped you if somebody would have, if this young man would have come up and said something about Chipotle, would it have stopped you from going after Chipotle based on what you had as far as these tools? If you felt exactly what you heard, that many people were asked to work, not asked to work, told to work 3 and 4 hours a night, and then Chipotle comes forward and wants a contract to service food here, would that have stopped you from going after Chipotle based on what you had as far as tools?
Well, for that example, we had an allegation. We heard the allegation earlier. But if there was an actual final determination by a court or an arbitrator that Chipotle had engaged in certain severe misconduct, such as wage theft or payroll fraud or something along those lines, and I thought that there was an opportunity to contract with Chipotle in the future, I could use that adverse determination to move forward with the debarment. Now, with all due respect to the individual that came up and spoke, if he made a complaint to our agency, similar to what he made today, I likely wouldn't do much with it because for me, a reasonable belief would require an investigation on our part. And because Chipotle, I don't think, is an active contractor, we likely wouldn't use our resources to initiate an investigation into whether Chipotle indeed, because that is a private business doing work with private clients, whether Chipotle did indeed deprive its employees of their due wages. So it could have a difference in that respect. We have debarred individuals and companies who have been convicted of certain offenses that are found in A, so serious offenses that weren't necessarily doing business with the county, but we want to ensure that they never do. So bribery was, I believe, the conviction, and that was in the past. But so it could be something similar if this passed. And again, I am neutral. I'm just stating what I see. If there was an adverse determination that was brought to our agency's attention, that might initiate debarment proceedings. Whereas if it was an entity that wasn't currently contracting with the county, like I said, we likely wouldn't initiate an investigation in order to form a reasonable belief that they had committed this offense in order to initiate debarment proceedings.
Well, through the chair, Madam IG, the young man comes forward and tells you that he's had wages stolen from him. And now Chipotle they supply us their burritos every Friday for some event here in somebody's office. So now they're a regular supplier.
Okay.
And you don't have a final determination. You only have that young man coming in there and telling you to his best belief. And as we talked about, he had the courage to come here and take that microphone. So now he's taking the courage to come and see you. You're telling me you would not have pursued that against Chipotle if they're a regular supplier?
If it was a contract, if it was a contractor that
we actually regularly buy.
Yes, no,
burritos.
that's a different situation than what I was speaking to, and I'm sorry if
And
I misspoke.
I'd be willing to bet if we check the records in 12 years, you will find Chipotle, my guess, is someplace as a regular supplier to food to this body someplace. I would actually take a cup of coffee on that one and guess that there's enough people around here that bring in Chipotle or something of that nature for a picnic, for whatever, fill in the blank. So just stay with me. They are a regular supplier for purposes of this assumption.
If there was an entity that was a contractor of the county, so they're doing business with the county, and we received a serious allegation. Young man comes to us, then I would imagine that we would initiate an investigation. I mean, right now we have, so the debarment code breaks out 5-year, 3-year, 18 months. 5-year, you need a civil judgment or a conviction. 3-year, you need a reasonable belief, because reasonable belief is a little more, I guess it's a little looser. But what we do is, if we don't have something, if we don't have an arbitration award, if we don't have something solid that somebody else has made a determination to give us reasonable belief, for instance, a tax lien, that's a reasonable belief that an outstanding tax lien would be a reasonable belief that a contractor has outstanding taxes. We would initiate an investigation to make a determination. And then if we found sufficient evidence to conclude that the contractor committed one of these offenses, we would then open up a debarment matter and initiate debarment proceedings.
He clearly told us that, to the chair, that he punched out. So now he's off the clock and he was told to work 3 hours later. That's, to me, would be sufficient probable belief that you should be going and following that up if that individual brings you your punch card, shows it and then shows him still working and not getting paid.
Well, so under the current one, if this does not pass, that could be so. If this passes, there would need to be an adverse determination. So a third party would need to make a final determination that that was indeed occurring.
But I think he's just talking about currently, right now, you would take that up as a possible debarment if that was brought to your attention.
If it was brought to our attention that one of our contractors,
Yes,
yes, was
perfect.
engaging in something that
Trying to
that was
say
in
laser focus.
violation of the debarment code,
We're
yes.
good.
Right, and that's what and the adverse determinations are really not a whole lot different than a court telling you that you've had a determination, or you've had a civil conviction or a civil judgment. Those are two different other versions. There's probably other bodies that could give you an adverse determination of that something is with the wage and hour division, or a number of other people could have given you that same piece of information, which is just not written into our current disbarment as far as what that adverse determination. We got two of them in there right now. It just seems to
Right,
me-
for the 5 years. This,
Yeah.
this adverse determination would fall under the 3-year.
Yeah,
So that's
it
something
just
different.
seems like we're adding redundancy to existing piece of legislation that's already in place. It's worked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Thank you very much. This concludes our review of the legislation. We have Meredith Turner with us, that was appointed pro tem for this particular meeting because of conflicts with our council president and our chairman, Sonny Simon. So please read ordinance number, or 02023-009 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to move ordinance 2023-0009 to the full council for second reading.
Second?
Second. All in favor? Oh, you got discussion? I was remiss. It's okay. In my chairmanship responsibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, we had our own internal advisor who does not speak as far as the county legal side, give his opinion that it's covered. We got a confirmation that he believes that Mike was in the correct position, and we got the Inspector General coming out and saying that the coverage would cover this right now. We could do this with legislation forever for the last, that we've taken forth 12 years from now, and add surplusage language to it. We could be spending the rest of our time doing this, and we already have legislation that covers the actions, and so I will not be supporting this.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you for your comments, and thank you for reminding me that after a second, it's open for debate. Councilman Miller.
Couple things. First of all, the administration has brought to my attention that there's still some questions over whether it should be the Department of Development or Department of Consumer Affairs as the point of contact on the education piece. And so if this is moved out today, we'll have further discussions with the administration, and if there's a minor amendment, we would bring that at second reading. The other thing that I'd like to say in response to the general discussion today is that this legislation has benefits for both workers and employers. It's beneficial to workers that it highlights our seriousness about wage theft. It sends a clear message. It puts wage theft clearly on the agenda of things for which a debarment can occur, which in the past, by practice, it has not been. But it also has benefits for employers in that it specifies that there has to be a final adverse determination by the state or federal authorities before the debarment would be considered. And currently, theoretically, it could currently be done on something less than that. So it provides clarity as to what the standard is, and it also advances wage theft to to something we're going to seriously deal with. And so I ask for the support of my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll do a quick roll call because it'll be, Madam Clerk? Oh, I'm just, the yay, nay thing.
Calling the roll on ordinance number 2023-0009. Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Schrein?
No.
Ms. Turner?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Appreciate everyone's healthy dialogue. This is what government should do. And I have any requests for miscellaneous? Hearing none, this meeting stands adjourned.